I would be remiss today if I didn't do a deconstructing the culture. Okay, it's time for some deconstructing the culture. Okay, the on the menu today is this film Cuties. So I have some complex thoughts about this film Cuties. Now, Cuties is a film that first made headlines on Netflix because the poster for Cuties is supremely disturbing the way that Netflix originally put it out. So Netflix put out a poster of these 4 little girls. I mean, and they are little. They're 11 years old. Okay, and as a father of 2 daughters under the age of 7, I can say that the way these girls was dressed was perverse and disgusting and pedophilic. And they are dressed completely inappropriately and horrifically, and they are posing in very sexual images and all this. It's gross, and Netflix had to take down the poster correctly. Okay, then there's the film. Okay, now, many things can be true about the film simultaneously. One, the themes of the film are why over-sexualization of children are bad. That is the actual theme of the film. Okay, now, the honest question to be asked about the film is when you cross the line, and this has been a long debated question in film, when you cross the line between depiction and exploitation. This has been a discussion in American film really going back to the end of the Hays Code, when you started seeing movies like A Clockwork Orange, and people were saying, okay, this shows a pretty graphic rape scene. Is that exploitation and pushing of rape, or is it actually condemnation of rape? Now, you've seen this in the context of violence, where ultra-violent movies are very often considered glorifications of the violence rather than condemnations of it or mere depictions of it. And so people get very upset about all of this. This film falls squarely into that category. I think you can certainly make a fair case that the director in this particular film directed the camera in disgusting ways at 11-year-old children. Not only can you make that case, I think that case is fairly obvious from the actual footage of the film. The question is whether the director is doing that in order to make you uncomfortable with the way these kids are being depicted, because that is part of a pop culture in which they are in which they are submerged. So the reason that I bring this up is because I think a lot of the people who watched this film, who watched the clips of the film, didn't actually watch the film, and they gave hot takes based on this. So this is why I'm going to provide a little bit of nuance, because I actually spent the time yesterday of watching this film, and it is indeed incredibly disturbing and upsetting and difficult to watch. So the clip that was making the rounds yesterday was this clip of these little girls dancing in very, very sexual ways. Okay, these kids are 11. 2 of them are of African extraction or Arab extraction. One is from Senegal. I'm not sure where the other one is from in the movie. And then 2 of them are white, French. Again, this is a French movie. To explain the context of this clip, I have to explain the plot of the movie. So the plot of the movie is that there is a little girl. Her name is Emmy. She's 11 years old, and she is a Muslim girl who is living in a fundamentalist Islamic family in Paris. Her parents, her mom is in the movie. Her mom is being forced to accept that the dad is going back to Senegal in order to bring a second wife, right? We find this out 15 minutes into the movie, that they've reserved a bedroom for the second wife, and that this little girl is being brought up in a culture that says that polygamy is good and that women should be forced to accept it thanks to the whim of Allah. Okay, this is made very, very clear in the film. This is not me, as a quote-unquote Islamophobe saying that, okay, I'm not an Islamophobe, number one, but beyond that, that is not what the film says, right? So the film is making the point that radical fundamentalist Islamic culture is anti-woman, which happens to be obviously true, right? Any culture that says that one wife should be forced to accept another wife is an anti-woman culture, right? That monogamy is one of the great hallmarks of Judeo-Christian civilization in the West. Okay, so she lives in this radical fundamentalist Islamic household. And she's being forced to accept as the daughter of one woman that she's going to have like a new stepmom, basically, because daddy is off in Senegal bringing back the wife. Dad is not present the entire film. Upset with her own culture, she begins to engage with a highly sexualized group of young 11-year-old girls. The point of this girls group is that they are bad people, right? That they've been completely misled by the culture. The parents are not there in any way, shape, or form. They're basically being raised by the internet. The point of the film is that these girls are being raised by the internet. And there are several scenes that prove this, right? That these girls are ignorant about sex, that they don't know anything about sex, that all they know about sex is stuff that they are learning online. There's a scene where they're talking about the actual biological function of sex, and they literally have no idea what they're talking about. There's a scene in which one of the girls finds a used condom in a forest where they're hanging out, and she blows it up like a balloon because she literally has no idea what it is, and all the other girls freak out. Right? These are little girls. They're 11. They're ignorant about sex, but they know what they see online. And what they see online is a bunch of women, grown women, who are acting in extraordinarily hypersexualized ways, and they understand that it makes these women popular and that the culture values this, and so they start acting in those same ways. Now, the other girls in the group, because they are sort of more ensconced in French secular hedonism, They sort of understand where the appropriate lines are, but Amy does not. And so she continues to escalate her behavior to the point where she's taking shots of her crotch and she's putting them online. The point of the movie, she becomes a worse person for moving away from fundamental moral tenets and moving toward a social media culture that values women for their sexuality and values girls for their sexuality. And so she's constantly misinterpreting things, right? There's a scene where she attempts to sexually proposition. She steals a cell phone from her cousin, who's an adult. She attempts to sexually proposition him in order to get back the cell phone. He, of course, reacts very badly because she's 11. And the point is that she doesn't know where any of the lines are because she's being raised by the internet. Because the internet and our over-sexualized culture deliberately forces the internalization of hypersexualization into young teens, into preteens. There's a scene that is described in a lot of the descriptions in which a 16 or 17-year-old girl shows her breast on screen. That's because the girls in the movie are watching this happen online. They're watching that video online. And they don't at any point say, is what the girl is doing right or wrong? Instead, they just say, wow, look how many likes she has. Maybe we should do stuff like that. Okay, so the point of the movie is that France has basically broken down into a society where, because of its multicultural ethos, it tolerates radical fundamentalist Islam, in which people are shipping in second wives from Senegal, on the one hand, and on the other hand is providing as a lived alternative the secular hedonistic lifestyle that over-sexualizes children, and that there's bleed-over effect from that that over-sexualized lifestyle from adults to children. So that's a pretty conservative message. Like, the actual message of the film is actually quite conservative. Now, the problem with the film comes in the depiction, right? Does this film cross the line between depiction and exploitation? So there's a clip going around yesterday of these girls dancing. It is, warning, spoiler warning, and not only spoiler warning, like nausea warning right now. This clip is graphic. It is a graphic clip of these girls dancing in very sexual ways. They are 11 years old. It's disgusting. It is meant to be disgusting. Okay, and I'll show you kind of why it's meant to be disgusting. Okay, so here's the clip that was going around yesterday, and people were rightly outraged at this clip.
I don't care if you really wanna trust me. I just wanna
Okay, you can see the adults reacting in the clip, not being upset that these girls are twerking, not being upset, and being kind of happy about it. And these girls are dancing very, very sexually. They're 11 years old. It's really, really disturbing for folks who can't see this, and there are shots of crotches and shots of butts. Okay, and it is these kinds of shots that people are saying, how in the world is this being promoted? How in the world is this even being filmed? I mean, these are 11-year-old girls in real life who are being exploited this way. You can see the adults are very excited about it. They're very happy about it. Okay, and then the girls start to get more and more sexual, right? And they start to get more and more sexual because they've coordinated this dance based on a video that they've seen online that is very much like WAP. Okay, like these very sexualized, hypersexualized lesbianic dances. Yeah, that's a scene in the film. There's a scene in the film where the main character, who is, again, the Senegalese girl, is literally sitting in a session with the other women. The other women have scarves over their head and they're praying, and she's sitting with her earphones in watching this sexualized, hyper-lesbian stuff, right, on her cell phone. As that scene goes on, you start to see cutaways of the crowd, and the crowd starts to get more and more disquieted because people in the crowd are realizing this is really over the top. This is really, really bad. The end of the scene, which was cut off online, was cut off for a reason. At the end of the scene is this girl, the main character, weeping openly and stopping the dance because she realizes that she has been exploiting herself, that she has made herself a worse person. She runs away from the dance. The end of the film is her rejecting both the second wedding for her father and the hypersexualized culture in favor of sort of this generic childhood innocence. She puts on a sweater that kind of buttons all the way up to the neck because it's supposed to be modest. And then she goes and she jump ropes to try and regain her innocence. Right? That's the end of the film. So several things can be true at once. And I think it's important to actually, watch things before you analyze what they are about. This may not justify why the film was made. Okay, the director of the film, by the way, has openly said that the reason the film was made is because she was walking. She was a black woman who was of Senegalese descent and grew up in an Islamic household. She said she was walking through the park in France and she saw a group of 11-year-olds dancing like this. And she decided that, and she said she was sickened by it, she says. And so she decided to make a movie trying to explore what in the world, as a culture, would we get to the point where 11-year-olds are dancing like this. Right? She's talked about this openly in interviews. So several things can be true at once. One, I don't think that the director meant to hypersexualize the girls for the pleasure of pedophiles. Two, Netflix definitely, with its original poster, hypersexualized the girls for the purpose of pedophiles. Netflix, their original poster was really, really bad. Three, the theme of the movie is that hypersexualization of children is not only bad, but that it springs from an adult culture that suggests that consent is the only value, and that bleeds down to people for whom consent is not possible, in ways that they don't themselves understand. That the hypersexualization of a society does bleed down to kids. That is a theme of the film. Third, that a culture that allows for no choice but a choice between a hypersexualized secular humanistic vision of hedonism on the one hand and Islamic fundamentalism on the other is a society that is fated for the garbage can. Right? That is a point that the movie is pretty openly making. Now, the critics, because critics mainly hate the right, and the critics have sinned here too, because the critics mostly hate the right, they've decided that this is a story of female empowerment through leaving Islamic fundamentalism in favor of twerking. That's not what the film is about. The director has said that's not what the film is about. Okay, the real question that should be asked here is, should a film like this even be made, despite the messaging, if it has to depict images like this in order to be made? I think that's a fair question. I think it's a fair question. I think it's a very fair question to ask whether the film has to depict as much of this as it does in order to achieve its purpose. The director would probably tell you that her purpose in showing this stuff was to make you uncomfortable, was to deliberately make the viewer uncomfortable so you realize that so many people are complicit in this culture that bleeds down to little girls. My guess is that's what the director would say. Does that justify the behavior? I think the case can be made that it certainly does not. That 11-year-old girls, no matter what you believe, were actually exploited in the same way that Brooke Shields was exploited at 12 when she was forced to get naked in like Blue Lagoon. I think that case can be made. But I think, again, that it is important to recognize what the movie is, what it was meant to be, and what it kind of isn't, so that you can have a more fully rounded discussion about it. Now, should you watch it? I don't think so, not unless you're willing to take, an hour and a half of being clubbed about the ears by some of that imagery, which, again, is supremely disturbing. But is it possible for somebody to say that they think that the messages of the film are not about pedophilia? I think it's pretty obvious the messages of the film are not about pedophilia. So there is a fully rounded, shaded version of what exactly Cuties was about. Now, does Netflix deserve to be boycotted for airing Cuties? Well, it's directed at mature audiences. It specifically says that on the film. Netflix should have been boycotted over its original poster. And there are a lot of films on Netflix that depict really bad stuff. The original poster was the problem. Okay, the film itself can be a problem. I can certainly see why you would think that it shouldn't have been made in the first place and that shouldn't have been receiving this sort of glorious coverage on the basis of the images that it glorifies, right? Even if it was doing so in order to make you uncomfortable, did it have to do that in order to make the point? And John Nolte's said this. I think he's probably correct. It didn't need to go this far in order to make the point. I totally get that. I kind of agree with it. The poster was the real problem because the poster obviously was directed at glorifying the sexual excess of children. That was the real problem. Okay, so now you have your movie guide to Cuties. It's a little more complicated than I think most of the takes you're going to get on it. But I think that, in all essence, we should try to be fair when we watch these movies and note where they are wrong and where they are evil and where they're making an overall not terrible point. The movie can be exploitative and bad in the way that people view it, and it can also be making a fairly good point, actually, about the destruction of a culture that has no centralizing principles rooted in virtue and morality. Thank you for tuning in to The Daily Wire, one of the fastest growing conservative media outlets in the country. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss out on any of our content.